You probably could hear me without the mic, but then I don't know how everybody, John and I are related in that sense, aren't we, John? So, you know, I'll tell you, life was exciting before, and now it's just got a whole lot more exciting. Every day I have something new happen, like I lose my notes as I'm looking for them here. There it is. You know, for those of you who don't know, I live in Belize. I work at a volunteer training center there. I teach mechanics, do a little construction. I'm a missionary. That's if somebody asks me what my trade is or what my vocation is or what my degree is, it's just I'm a missionary. And so I've been doing this for now, my wife's not in here, she'll correct me. I always get the amount of years wrong, but I would say it's getting close to 17 years. And so, anyway, I love what I do. And we've been in Belize, we've had the volunteer training center going on, and the COVID thing was kind of exciting. Of course, it always catches it. No, in fact, I don't know if I ever heard a prophecy seminar mention COVID. You know, I thought, you know, as Adventists, we kind of feel like we've got things figured out. Have you, you know, I've seen them like, well, they've got hey, this is going to happen, then somewhere the close of probation happens, and then we've got all the other things, all the events. I lost my mic, didn't I? Caught the, people are looking at me. All right, there it is. My PA guys, I'm going to drive them crazy because I use my hands and I've got a big enough mouth and I'm deaf and I can't hear what's going on. This is going to make it exciting. All right, how about now? Can you hear me now? Good. All right, yeah, okay, good. Just point out, don't worry, that's good, it helps. So, let's see, where was I? We were talking about Belize. COVID problems, yeah. So COVID and prophecy, I didn't hear a prophecy seminar with it, but, you know, it hit us, and Belize, you know, they shut down, and of course we took Ashley's advice when we bought property for our school. We have 100 acres in the country. So we were there in the country carrying out our school. It's hard to send kids home because, well, none of them are from there. They all live scattered from the tip of South America all the way to, you know, folk from the U.S. In fact, we have a couple of MOVE students here. I'm just going to invite them to stand up. I brought them along with me. These are great guys. This is Matt and Austin, and you're welcome to put them to work doing anything you'd like them to do. They're willing. They're volunteers, willing volunteers. And so at the end of the program, I was kind of wondering exactly what the next steps are going to be. And people always were, you know, asking me, and I'm going to address this later on, you know, what's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen next? And of course, I'm not sure. But I had a phone call right at about 2 or 3 weeks after our classes finished, and I had a phone call, and it was from an orphanage in Honduras, and they said, Jeff, we need you to do a medevac. Can you medevac this young man? A young man that was 14 years old, had a brain tumor, couldn't walk, was having a hard time swallowing. It was growing quite quickly. And there was a group of doctors out of North Carolina that were trying to help them get to the States. I said, well, if you get a visa for this young man, I will do what I can to help do a medevac up to the States for this young man. So that was on a Tuesday, a Monday, and they had an appointment Wednesday for that young man, and they got the visa. The minute they got the visa, now I had a big task on my hands. Every country in South America is closed. There are no flights into any of these places. So you can get special permission to do these special flights, but the problem is the typical agencies that give these permissions are no longer giving them. They're typically some state of emergency committee, and how to get in contact with them, I thought, man, Lord, it will be nothing short of a miracle if I get this young man in there. And so I began to get ready to go get the plane ready. I went down to Wednesday. I'm filling out an application, sent it off to Honduras to get the flight permit in the morning, and as I'm driving down to the airport to do the pre-flight on the plane, I get a message back from them, and the thing was they sent it to me on a PDF that you couldn't fill out. So I just printed it off and hand filled it out, scanned it, and sent it to them. Oh, got to be done on a computer. Well, now I'm on my cell phone halfway between my house to the airport, which is like a 45-minute drive, and time is of the essence. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I need that permit today. And so I'm trying to download some app on my phone to figure out how to type in all this information onto this PDF page that has all these questions. And so I finally, here I am, I'm fiddling on my phone. I finally get the thing filled out, send it off, and rush down to the airport. I do the pre-flight, fly the plane. I had to get special permission to fly the plane, but I always like to fly it right before I take it off across the Gulf, just make sure everything's working. It makes you feel better, And so anyway, so I get done and I land, and they're like, oh, by the way, you forgot to put the destination airport in Honduras. And I'm like, what? And of course I zoom out my thing, and sure enough, I missed the little box that said what airport I'm going to. They must have thought I was a real retard who filled that out. So quick, fill it out, send it back to them. It's 5 o'clock, and I'm like, Lord, I don't think I'm going to get this permit today. And sure enough, the Lord worked out a miracle. 7 o'clock that night, they sent me my flight authorization. Now, the next morning, I get everybody packed up and ready to go, and we get down to the airport early in the morning. Of course, the airport is closed. Nobody's there but the immigration customs are there, I guess, but no passengers. And I get there, and I didn't realize, of course, rules had changed like they have been recently. Pretty much every week there's a new rule that we don't know about. And I didn't know that I needed to file an exit permit. And so here I am, now I've got to get an exit permit from the Oversight Committee, and I know the Belize's a small country, 350,000 people. I know the director of the Civil Aviation, but I don't know who's on the Oversight Committee or what they got going on. So here I am, I'm trying to send an email and send a request, and I'm stuck in this airport. And I'll never forget, you ever pray for divine appointments? If you don't, you should start. By the way, Desire Rages talks about every child is born into the kingdom of God as a missionary, and life is about mission. I do a lot of normal things as a missionary. I pour concrete, build buildings, fix junk. I mean, it's normal life. But that life is peppered with divine appointments where you're sharing Christ with someone. So here I am, I'm stuck in an immigration office, their break room. And there is about, I would say, 10 immigration officers in there. Now, Belize is an interesting country culturally wise. It's very diverse. We've got Mayans, which are the Native Americans there. They are the natives. And then we've got, people, immigrants from Honduras, from Guatemala, from Mexico. And then we've got the Caribbean black population. And then we've got Chinese and Mennonite and all kinds of things. But it's really nice because Belize is very, how can I say, just very, it's a mixing pot, and people really don't see race too much. And, but that day, now, and I will make another precursor, I'd quit watching the news about a month before. Boy, the news is something else. And if you start, when I first hit, I was like, oh, wow, I need to figure this out. And, some people would say this, and other people would say that, and the politicians would say something else. And I figured, boy, this is a black hole of my time. And I just kind of flipped off the Facebook news, Google News, CNN News, and just kind of put my cell phone away and continue to live life. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. But this lady, she asked me, she says, have you been watching the news? And I said, well, honestly, I quit. It's just been crazy, and I haven't done it. She's like, you don't understand. I mean, about the riots and things, and this is all was just starting to happen. And she says, you just don't understand about the injustice and what it means to live a marginalized life. And I said, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I've been a foreigner for close to 17 years now, and as a foreigner, you just never have the same rights as a citizen. You know how that is? I said, you don't have the same rights. I can't get all upset at an immigration office. You know what they're going to do to me? They're going to be like, beat it, buddy. Go back to your country. Well, I want to come in their country, so I got to kind of tiptoe around, and sometimes things don't happen. So I tried to explain that to her. Oh, you'll never understand. And then she kind of kept pressing the topic with me, and I thought, wow. I said, but I will tell you something that I do understand. I said, I understand privilege. And she looked at me. I said, sure. I said, my children, I teach them every day that they're privileged. I said, my children live a unique life. My children, when they come up here, they've got cousins and family that they live an American lifestyle. So we've got the plastic playhouses and all the plastic toys you want, and the trampolines and the four-wheelers and the boats and et cetera. I mean, this is normal stuff for an American kid. Nothing wrong, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not knocking it. But I said, now, they don't have that. We live quite a bit simpler of a life in some aspects. I said, my son, he builds all his toys out of the woods and, plays on the ranch. I said, that's it. But the friends that they have, I said, are illegal immigrants. I said, a lot of them have abusive family. A lot of them don't eat 3 meals a day. I said, and those kids look at my kids like they're millionaires. And I tell my kids, you are. In fact, you are so blessed, and with that blessing comes, with privilege, you are so privileged, I said, comes responsibility. Comes responsibility to share that privilege with others. I said, this morning I'm sitting in your office. It's not easy. I said, Belize is closed. I don't know when I'm going to get back in the country. If I leave, you won't let me back in. And my wife this morning, as I'm getting ready to leave, she's crying and saying, do you have to go? And I said, well, if it was our 14-year-old daughter with a brain tumor, well, there would be no discussion. I would be on that plane in just a second. And so I said, you're not a pilot. I said, I'm a pilot. I'm privileged. In fact, I got my pilot's license in northern Michigan waxing airplanes. I said, and not that I did anything to deserve it. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and there were some airport folk who took me under the wing and kind of helped me, gave me a job working on airplanes, and and lo and behold, here I am. I'm a pilot. Not only am I a pilot, I have an airplane. And so I have both these things. You have neither of those, but I said, you're privileged too. She looked, sure. I said, how many Belizeans would love to have your job? The janitor lady in the same break room, she pipes up and said, I'd like to have it. I said, sure you would. I said, it's a good job. I said, so it's easy. I said, it's easy to get on Facebook. It's easy to kind of rant and rave about what other people aren't doing and forget about what we should be doing. I said, I'm not negating that people don't do bad things up there. I said, that's what happens. But I said, it doesn't mean that I can't change necessarily their choices, but I certainly have control over mine. And I certainly have that responsibility. I said, and so this young man that I'm doing the medevac flight on, I said, he's from El Salvador. He can't afford the flight. And the person who is going to take his treatment is the director of St. Jude Hospital. I said, now he's privileged. Because other people with privilege realize that with privilege comes responsibility. That room was quiet, and I said, the reality is I said, I'm under a lot of pressure here. I'm trying to do this thing and help him, but I forgot about this permit. I got this kid's life on the line, and I'm trying to expedite this flight as quickly as possible. One of the immigration officers stepped up and said, can I pray with you? And he offered the most beautiful prayer in that room. And, I believe that we're all privileged today. We are privileged to have truth. We are privileged to have the light, and we're privileged to be able to be here in God's, meeting together in God's amphitheater, in the country with freedoms. And those privileges, with that, we have responsibility, and it's to share the light with others. And so that's just kind of some of the things that have been happening. That's how I got up to the States. So we medevaced him. I ended up landing in Asheville, North Carolina at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And, of course, I got delayed because of thunderstorms. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about a little bit. Weather is a real challenge with the flying thing. Flying actually is quite easy. I tell people, I'm a flight instructor, and I can teach anybody to fly in about 2 minutes. It's easy. All you got to do is pull back, you go up, push down, you go down, turn left, you go left, turn right, you go right. It's that simple. Landing's another story, but flying, that's easy. I remember I took a guy flying with me the first time in the mission field. I'm a workaholic, I've been all my life, and I'm sure I was working on something kind of late, and I was real tired the next morning at 3 o'clock in the morning when I had to fly him out. And so it was still dark out, and we're flying along. I gave him a little instruction right there. If you guys come down as volunteers, I'll give you a little teaching here. Matt, on the way back, he's going to fly. I've got him. He was watching on the way up, but next time on the way back down, we'll have him flying. But anyway, I said, hey, man, I'm just really tired. I'm going to close one eye. You just you see the little wings here? You just keep them level. That's real easy. No problem. So I closed an eye, and he'd fly a little bit, and he'd nudge me, hey, something's wrong. And, of course, we're banking off this way. I said, oh, you're doing a great job here. I turn it straight and back around, and I'd close that eye again, and a couple minutes later, he'd nudge me, I think something's wrong, and that plane would be going off this way. Finally, we got it straightened out, and the sun came up. Both my eyes worked real well after that, so it was good. But, it takes a little bit of time to teach people to fly. And, but flying in thunderstorms is a whole nother level. Mm-hmm. Now, in aviation, we have weathermen, people who forecast the weather, and most of the weather, have you ever watched the 10-day forecast? You watch it? Quit, because it's never going to be what it's supposed to be. Never. I tell people, politicians and weathermen, they got both. They got great jobs because they can be wrong 99% of the time and still get paid. Yeah. And so I know a lot of people, now in the end times, people are always asking me, Jeff, what do you think is going to happen? They want the nitty-gritty details of how that forecast is going to look. And I'm going to tell you something, it's very difficult to forecast the weather. And it's very, very difficult to get the details nailed down about what's going to happen in the future. Prophecy typically, and like I said, I've heard lots of theories about all the final events, heard lots of seminars, and I didn't hear anybody mention COVID yet. I've heard about asteroids, and I've heard about nuclear bombs, and I've heard about China, and I've heard about Russia, heard all kinds of theories, but no one's mentioned COVID. And so it doesn't always happen like we think it's going to happen, and the disciples are proof of that. And so, because it's difficult to predict the weather. However, I can tell you that I fly into Florida all the time. And I will tell you that after 2 o'clock in Florida, I could make a good weatherman. It's very possible there'll be thunderstorms, almost always in the summer. Yeah. There'll be thunderstorms in Florida, there'll be thunderstorms in Georgia, and there'll be thunderstorms in Tennessee. All summer long, after about 2 o'clock, you've got a pretty good chance of thunderstorms. And so, you know why it's difficult to tell you where those thunderstorms, I mean, if you come up and fly with me sometime, you'll see it just looks like popcorn. How did they know which little cloud is going to explode and become a great big thunderstorm? They don't. It's impossible to know. So the closer you get, it's a little bit, the weather forecast gets a little bit better, but I know a lot of people who spend all their time trying to forecast bad weather and avoid it. I'm going to tell you something, that avoiding the thunderstorms is going to pretty near come impossible. When I fly south of the border, the States is really easy to fly because we've got, I'm flying along here, Matt can tell you, I've got an iPad on my phone now that gets internet while I'm flying. It's a type of internet. And it's giving me the weather all along my route. It's got radar on it, it's got satellite on it, it's got everything on it. But when I go south of the border, I don't have anything. There's nothing. There's no. I fly over the Amazon jungle and I don't even talk to anyone. And it's just like flying over Florida. There's thunderstorms everywhere. And how do you learn to fly in a thunderstorm? Well, I want to tell you that you normally don't do it. You don't learn to, of course, when you're in the cloud, you can't see anything, right? I remember one time my wife and I, my dear wife, say again?
You gotta go above it.
Yes, it would, this drawer is going to catch me every time. You got to go above it, that's right, except for I fly little planes that don't get above it. Yeah, they're just small. In fact, we were in a small plane flying over the Amazon, just crossed the Amazon River, and we were headed to Bolivia. And it was just raining everywhere. But it wasn't, it was just raining, overcast, and we could kind of see the jungle below us. We were kind of in and out of the clouds, but I could hear lightning coming over my radio. I had no radar, no storm scope, no radio contact. We were just kind of out there, but we were with a group of other pilots. And anyway, we ended up getting into probably the worst thunderstorm I've ever been in my life. I hit my head on the ceiling that left a goose egg, and my wife was in the back, and we went from, I think we were at 12,000 feet, we shot to 16,000 feet in less than a minute. That thunderstorm just shot that airplane up like that, and then the next minute we went down to about 6,000 feet, and it was a minute. And that whole airplane was shaking, and boy, I'll tell you what, it just really redefined flying in instrument weather. Now, I'm going to tell you something, we're all going to get into a storm like that, and you wonder, well, how do we navigate in a weather? I want to tell you a little story. About two types of pilots. It's actually happened in World War II. By the way, I will finish. I have a bad habit of starting a story and finish. We did come out on the other side of the storm. We didn't rag. We survived it. I remember every little puff after that. I just went around. I was done with flying in the clouds for a while. But I was real glad I learned to fly and learned to trust my instruments. And I'll talk a little bit more about how the details of that maybe a little bit later on. But I want to share with you a story tonight of two pilots. And this is two pilots, very similar airplanes, very similar missions, but very different results. They were flying out of the European mission there. They were doing bombing raids, and the Air Force base that they were using was near somewhere in Italy. I want to say it was near Rome. But basically, they were doing bombing missions, and in one of these, the first pilot, the first group I want to talk about, they went and did their bombing mission, and on their way home, they were chit-chatting, and it was a nice, smooth flight. The mission went well, and normally you're kind of relaxed. Now the intense moment is you're dropping the bombs, they're shooting at you, but once you leave the war zone, it's a little bit easier to kind of cruise back, and they were just cruising back, chit-chatting along. But one of they didn't realize, well, they were talking in about 2 hours. It was normally supposed to be about a 4-hour flight, about 2.5 hours along. One of their little gauges, one of these little instruments, did something kind of strange. It's a homing instrument that points to the airport. So it's got a little needle, kind of like a compass, and it just points to the radio station at that airport. That little compass did 180 degrees and started pointing behind them. Now that guy, he tapped on it, I'm sure, but they thought, 2.5 hours, must be some sort of error in the instrument, and they kept flying. And they kept flying. When the 4 hours came up, the little compass needle was just spinning circles. It was pointing at nothing. And they called on their radio trying to reach the Air Force Base tower, and no answer. And they continued to call, and they continued to try and reach the Air Force Base probably for another 20 minutes before they decided to turn around. And they decided to turn around, and they never reached their destination. After they went and searched for them, they found their aircraft across the Mediterranean Sea in northern Africa, crashed in the desert. What they didn't know was that they had a tremendous tailwind that shifted the time of their flight to a tremendously shorter time. Had they only, when that instrument switched, called on the radio, it would have saved them from a disaster. But they didn't trust their instruments. They were too calm and relaxed, cruising on, thinking that the battle was over, and they perished in the desert. Second pilot. Now, thunderstorms are difficult, but fog is another real problem. You got to see the runway to land. Not anymore. By the way, when you fly on commercial flights, these things they auto land. You don't even need a pilot. I mean, these are just incredible. They just boop, They do it. They got it all figured out. Now, today it's a different story. But in World War II, they didn't have auto land, and they had old steam gauges, and they fly planes like I fly, a lot older. So this guy, they call the airport up, and the airport says, we're closed. We're socked in with fog. He's like, I'm landing there. I don't have enough gas to go anywhere else. So he tells his co-pilot, we're going to shoot the approach. And interestingly enough, the instrument that lines you up with the runway is a cross. Isn't that cool? I love that. It's a cross. It's a cross. And if you keep the cross right crossed, it will always take you right to the center line of the runway. And I think that's something we can remember as Christians always. If we keep the cross at the center of our lives, it'll take you straight to the runway. It'll take you to the promised land. And so here he is. Now normally you need to see the runway a little bit beforehand, but he didn't. He trusted that cross all the way down. He told his co-pilot, call the feet, how many feet we are from the runway, and he would call it 100 feet, 75 feet, 60, 50, 40, 25, and then he pulled the power, and he flared and pulled, and they hammered in the runway, and he just hit on the brakes. He could see nothing. They brought the airplane to a stop, and they called the tower, tower, we can see absolutely nothing. Send a lead car to lead us back to the terminal. And they sent out a lead car, and the lead car ran into the airplane. That's a very different story. Which plane would you like to be on? Yeah, I would too. That pilot knew his instruments. Friends, it's not about, I watch a lot of Christians trying to forecast the weather, trying to see and avoid crisis. Friends, we are going to come to a point where crisis is unavoidable. And I would ask myself these questions as I'm thinking about, we're coming into the end times. What would I tell people? What would I tell them? What is the most important things you need to know? And friends, I want to tell you the most important thing you need to know is how to fly on instruments. But when do you learn to fly on instruments? Do you learn to fly? Do you think I take my students out and teach them in thunderstorms? No. No. We still try and avoid them. I avoid them now. If I can avoid them, I'll avoid them. But they're not always avoidable. They're not always avoidable. And so my question is what is our instruments? You know, yesterday I was having a conversation with Wayne, and the classic question of every day comes up. What is the Lord's will? What does He want? How do we know? Sometimes that is not an easy question to answer. It's not. And I asked myself those things, and Wayne and I had a prayer, and I was thinking, God, what is your will? And I am trying to follow it. I want to do what you want me to do. And I want to be honest, I am a reluctant preacher. You say, oh, Jeff, did you do great? You're up there. I got verbal diarrhea. I can talk. It's not the talking problem that's a problem. But sometimes I have a problem. I feel like it's futile. I want to talk a little bit more about that later on, but I think, you say the same things, but people still, does it make a difference? But I know it does, and I've seen the Lord work it out, but I'm in the middle of a building project there in Georgia, and I thought, Lord, do you really want me to come back when John invited me in January and asked me to do this thing? And I said, yeah, this summer I'll do that, but COVID didn't exist, and now COVID's happened, and now I've got and I thought, man, now it's going to, and then he's like, well, when you get up here, you need a test, and everything seemed like it was going to be a real problem. And I thought, boy, God, is this your will? You really want me here? And as I began to think about it, I want to tell you that the Lord really showed me that He wanted me here. And He didn't want me here just anyway. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how some of those events transpired that we got here this afternoon. But God worked out a lot of miracles in the past. But how do we know the Lord's will? How do we trust our instruments? And I wish I could tell you all the details tonight, and I'm not going to. But I'm going to give you a couple of promises, a couple instruments that you're going to need to learn how to use. And I want to tell you, the way you learn to use an instrument is by practice. Okay? When I started flying instruments, we actually flew in clear weather. I put on these they call them foggles. They're just this view restricting device so you can only see your instruments. And I've got an instructor sitting next to me, and we go down and he says turn right, and I turn right and left and up and down, and here we go, and he says, okay, take the foggles off, and lo and behold, I've dropped my thing. There's the runway. And then you start doing it, and you follow the needles, and you follow the cross, and he says, take the foggles off, and there it is, every single time. And pretty soon you got it figured out. Wow, hey, that's pretty amazing. Now, when you're flying on instruments, it's funny that your feelings, especially when you first start, you get a disease, I don't know if it's a disease, but a sensation called vertigo. It's a weird sensation. I mean, it is weird, and I've had it bad. I've had it bad a few times. And it is such the sensation that you are in a turn. You are turning, and it feels like you're turning and you're turning, but the instrument says you are straight and level. And you feel like you have got to turn. And many pilots have killed themselves because of that sensation. Because they trust their feelings and not the instruments. And so it's by practice over and over and over again that you know your instruments do not lie. And you have to trust them. And so let me ask you a couple questions. Now, let's go to, well, of course, knowing your instruments. Let's go to John. I've been telling stories. I want to give a few things here. It says, John chapter 17. This is where Jesus talks about knowing your instruments. He says, and this is life eternal. That they may, what? That they may know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Let me tell you something. You need to know God. How do you get to know Him? How do you get to know someone? Well, you get to know Him by spending time with them, you'd say, and spending time in His Word. As we get to know Jesus, the Jesus of the Bible, it is so powerful. How does Jesus do things? Let's take a look at Luke 6:38. Luke 6:38. Now this is a principle, and if someone would read that for me, I would much appreciate it. Nice and loud. Luke 6:38.
Want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Luke 6:38. Give, and it shall be given unto you. In good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye meted withal, it shall be measured to you again.
Okay, so the Bible is saying, give, and it will be given unto you. Do you believe that promise? No, that's a principle. That's an instrument. If you give it, it will be given unto you. Have you tried it? It's not always easy to experience that. You know, you say, well, Lord, but it's my, you know, you think about the widow who baked the cake for Elijah. You know, it's my last meal. It's one thing to give $20, you know, that I've got in my pocket. It's another thing to write, you know, a check, depending on how the percentage of what your total wealth is, the percentage of that check, well, that's the difficulty it becomes of giving. You know, I've never read a rich person who feels rich, but because wealth is very relative, very, very relative. So it's really, you know, the difficulty of giving has to do, but really not in number, dollar figures, but in percentages. And so as we give, and it shall be given unto you, you know, as we try that, the times to practice with that is not in the thunderstorm. I'm a last minute guy. I work under pressure. I know how it's like, but I want to tell you that learning to trust your instruments is not something you save for the last minute. Oh, hey, wait, the thunderstorm's coming. Quick, let me get this figured out. What was that instrument again that I needed to, it doesn't work that way, does it? Now, I want to tell you, there's another one, and it's found in Luke, again, same chapter. Luke chapter, I'm sorry, not same chapter, Luke, same book, chapter 17, verse 33. And I want to say this, as I was flying up here, I'm reading the emergency procedures of my airplane. Always constantly reviewing them, just remembering, hey, this is how what do I do? What do you do in a crisis? This is another thing that you teach in flying. But this particular verse, it says, whosoever shall seek to save his life shall what? And whosoever shall lose his life or shall preserve it. And in Matthew it says, whosoever loses his life for my sake shall save it. Now, in a crisis, people go into a term they call survival mode. You ever heard of that? You're just trying to survive. Now, if we were to talk about survival in the context of this verse, does that sound like a very good idea? It's not. And I want to tell you that it goes totally contrary. It is the vertigo of life. Survival. In other words, everything in you says you've got to worry about taking care of yourself when crisis happens. I'd love to help you, man, but we're in a crisis here. Can't you see? Have you heard, maybe heard somebody say that? I mean, it's all I can do to survive. Let me tell you something. That is death mode for a Christian. Says, he who shall seek to save his life will lose it. Let me tell you something, and each one of you have to apply that instrument yourself. This is a difficult one. But you don't start learning with it in the thunderstorm. You can start practicing now. You can start practicing, am I just thinking about myself? Am I just prioritizing myself? Or am I living for Christ? Survival mode. I think that a lot of times we talk about end time events, and I don't want to be misunderstood here. Country living is important. I'm not saying that country living isn't important. Country living is important. Let me tell you something. The influences of the cities on our children are terrible. If you have children, you should not live in the cities. You should live in the country. And even if you don't have children, you shouldn't live in the cities, because other people's, you are who your friends are. You are who your friends are. If you're hanging out with everybody who can only think about money, entertainment, and money and entertainment, all you're going to think about is money and entertainment. So who are you surrounding yourself with? Who are you surrounding your influences with? And we need to be in the country, yes, but living in the country is so that we can grow as Christians, not so that we avoid the thunderstorm. Because the thunderstorm is going to come whether you're in the country or you're in the city, my friends. And we need to learn to fly in the thunderstorm, and we need to learn to trust our instruments. And one of these most important ones is that it is not about surviving, but it's about surrendering to Christ. That day when I'm sitting in the airport, I would have, hey, believe it, I live in a 100-acre ranch. I got it made. I got 3 acres of gardens. I just harvested 10,000 pounds of onions. We can have onion soup for, at least 6 months. Well, I'd get sick of onions here in a real short hurry, wouldn't I? But, I just put in a 1/2 acre of peanuts, and we got the farm. I got all the tools. I don't need anybody. I'm good. Why do I need to go put on a mask and be harassed by immigration officers and, oh man, all this fiasco? Well, because I'm privileged, right? And with that privilege comes responsibility, and each one of us has that responsibility to share Christ. Do not get into survival mode. Now is the time to preach and share the blessings that God is giving you, and you will experience what it means to give, and it will be given unto you. These promises, and you go back to Matthew chapter 6. I mean, I can't tell you all of these things. I mean, the Bible's full of them. We'd be here all night. But the thing is what I don't want you to do is say, oh, Jeff, that's a great story. That was neat. I really appreciate that. And you just hear it and you never practice it. You never put it into action. Hearing about it isn't sufficient. You have to try it for yourself. Matthew 6, verse 33 says, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. We've heard that verse before? You just haven't. Do you remember what the verses before it say? Maybe you forgot. But remember, it says, don't worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to drink or what you're going to wear. Now, wait a minute. I got to be honest with you. I'm a worrier. I love to worry. I stay up at night thinking about all the things that I should do and shouldn't do and how I'm going to make things. And I worry and I fret and I worry pray. Does anybody else worry pray? I do that all the time. You know, we just pray and worry and fret and ask the Lord, you know, Lord, how am I going to solve this problem, Lord? What about this? I'm praying, but I'm worry praying. And so here I am. I'm doing my worry prayer, and I'm a prayer warrior. I just coined a new term just now. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I am. They're giving God advice in my prayer about how we should do things. And we need to learn to experience Christ. I want to tell you, I have experienced this promise over and over and over again, and I still prayer worry. I still wonder, and I get back up to the States and I'm thinking, Lord, you know, what if I get stuck here? And I need to find a vehicle for my wife, and what am I going to do? And I'm worrying and fretting, and you know, God has a way to. I'm in the middle of building a warehouse for sending mission supplies overseas. It's in Georgia. A couple of these boys here, they've been working with me on it, and I'll tell you stories about that later. But here I am. I've just spent a week building a pad. It's 50 by 120, and the next day I'm going to pour 120 yards of concrete in one day. Now, I've never done that in my life. That's the biggest pour I've ever done. And you know, I got to tell you, concrete is stressful. It's just like flying a little bit. You see, when you fly, you take off with a tank full of gas, and you got to get back on the ground before that tank full of gas runs out. That's why I like to always have a lot of gas when I fly. I just fill it up. The more options I got, the better, right? Well, concrete's the same way. When you start pouring that stuff on the ground, it's going to get hard on you whether you want to eat lunch or not. Whether somebody came over to visit you or something broke down. I've seen concrete trucks that are just ruined because the old concrete, they just couldn't get it. The truck broke down, had, you know, something happened to the engine, and that old concrete didn't care. And then pretty soon they got 6 yards or 7 yards of good hard big rock inside that barrel, and it don't go out the same way it came in. You know, it came in all nice and smooth, and but as a big rock, it just doesn't come out. You know what they do? They just throw it away because there's nothing else you can do. So concrete can go real bad, and I of course I'm prayer worrying about it as I'm working on this equipment. And I've got, you know, it's Georgia, by the way, and it was June, wasn't it? Been then? It was July. That was what it was. To get my good Southern accent out, it was July, and it rains every day. And the guys are like, "You going to pour concrete?" And I was like, "Well, hey, if I waited on the rain, well, I'd never pour. I'm just going to have to pick a day and pour." And so, of course, you look at the 10-day forecast, and it forecasts thunder showers for the next 3 months. So, and as it got closer and closer, one day I decided to cancel Wednesday, and I bumped it to Thursday because the weatherman there, he thought it was a 20% chance of rain. I thought, well, hey, that's better than anything else I've seen in about 4 weeks. So. But there, that Wednesday night, someone calls me on the phone. Now, it's 7 o'clock. I'm running a dozer, fixing up the entrance there. I'm kind of worrying about this concrete. And he calls me up and says, "Jeff, my son's working on a wave runner, and he'd like to learn how to fix it. You think you could help me?" You know what I wanted to answer? No, I'd just rather go to bed, thanks. You know, I'm going to get home at 8 o'clock. I've got to drive an hour, but I said, no, why don't you meet me up at the hangar at 8 o'clock? So I go out to the hangar, they pull that Wave Runner in there, and it's normal. I've worked, I used to snowmobile. Then I gave up that habit because I thought I'd never make it to heaven. Boy, it's hard for mechanics to get to heaven. It's just patience. I don't have a lot of patience, and those old snowmobiles, boy, they tested my patience as a kid. But the Wave Runner is just a water version of a snowmobile, so, I've worked on them quite a bit, and we started working on that thing, and luckily, it wasn't a big deal. It was just a little fuel pump issue that was stuck, and we fixed it. I was there about an hour and a half working on that, and they were so surprised and excited that it ran, and I thought, well, praise the Lord, at least something simple can be a blessing to somebody else. And at the end, he says, Jeff, I want to ask you a few questions. And so he asked me some questions about, normally most Americans ask me about money questions on mission and how the money thing works, and I don't have very many answers. I just, the Lord, He works it out somehow. But he says, do you think you could use a minivan? Well, I had a little problem because I brought my niece up with me, and that puts 6 of us, and now we don't fit into a regular car, and so I was kind of needing a minivan, and I said, absolutely I could use a minivan. Well, I've got one, and he had a nice Honda Odyssey. And I'll tell you, that was on Wednesday night. And my wife, I had to go down. I was going down on Monday to go pick my wife up to bring her back from Belize. Remember, I did the Medivac thing? And well, anyway, we were separated for a couple weeks. It took me that long to get permission to get back in there to get her. I couldn't even, well, that's a whole nother story. I wasn't supposed to leave the airplane, which created a lot of problems because I didn't know it. So anyway, I get myself into all kinds of trouble. I tell people, God does all kinds of miracles. The biggest miracle He does is fixing the stuff I've messed up, And so He's got to do some sort of miracle to fix it. And but anyway, I got my wife back in on Monday, and on Tuesday, my wife had the minivan to drive. In fact, last night I was up kind of late putting a clutch on the AC, so now it even has AC. So it's a big blessing, and God has a million ways to provide. We don't know it, and I'll tell you, God gave me perfect weather. I'll just say this: the concrete floor, just to tie up that concrete floor, we poured it on Thursday morning, started at 5 a.m., and I was done with it at 2 o'clock. Wasn't the best pour I've ever had. It worked out great. It had 3 power trowels on it, and I got on there with the power trowel and never got off for about 2 hours, but when I got off, it was hard and done. And it never rained on it. The Lord was merciful, and if you want to see pictures about that and ask about that later on, you're welcome to. But I just want to tell you that you gain experience trusting your instruments through practice, and you have to practice now. Quit wasting your time trying to forecast the weather. Learn to trust your instruments. If you want to do something productive right before a crisis, start practicing trusting your instruments. That's the best advice I could give you. Because my stories, it sounds neat and great, but you just say, well, that's Jeff, that's not me. Well, let me tell you, God, the same God that is the God of Jeff is your God. And He is more than able to do more exceedingly abundantly for you as He is for me. He is an amazing God, but we've got to get to know Him. This is life eternal, that you know Him. Do we know Him? I pray that you do, and I pray that you continue to practice. And I will tell you that even if you have trusted the instruments in the past, that's something you've got to do all the time, continually. Keep practicing with those instruments, because you never know when you're going to pop into a thunderstorm. And I will tell you this, that not all of us are going to get into the thunderstorm at the exact same time. I was flying with 3 airplanes, and I was the only one that got the bad cell. We weren't all in the exact same positions, but I hit the cell, and it shot me to the moon, and I was getting beat around. They were kind of beat around a little bit, but nothing like I don't know if I hit the center of I don't know what happened, but man, did it send me for a ride. But I'll tell you what, I was very thankful. I had lots of practice trusting those instruments. And by God's grace, we came out on the other side. And by God's grace, we'll come out on the other side in the promised land. And that, I was just telling my kids this morning in morning worships, I said, every time I go someplace and I'm anticipating to travel, I think of myself there. And when I get there, I thought, well, hey, I was just thinking about that, what it'd be like to be there, and now I'm here. And I can't wait to have that feeling in heaven. I can think of myself there. I mean, I can see the tree of life. I want to just drink the water from the river of life. Just dive in it. I want to stand on the sea of glass, and I want to think, Jeff, you were just thinking about being there, and now it's done. It's like standing on that hard concrete slab. The day after that morning, I was stressing about it, and there it is. It's done. And we're going to stand there, and we'll be like, whoo, we made it. Praise God. And I'll tell you, the people that we bring there with us, we just can't imagine the joy that'll bring in our hearts. So I can't wait to see you all there. It'll make it, it's going to be worth it. And you'll be like, Jeff, you know that camp meeting, we were there, and I'd be like, praise the Lord, brother. If something I said was a blessing, amen, it was worth the trip. You know, and I know we're going to hear stories like that, and I'm excited. And Jesus is coming soon, friends. We need to know our instruments. Let's bow our heads. Gracious Lord, time is running out. Your coming is soon, and we're so excited. But Lord, I pray that you will help us to trust your promises, to know your promises, that we can know your will, that we know you so well that, oh, this is what Jesus would do. Let me do that. Lord, help us. Help us to practice now. Lord, we know that the storms are coming. We don't know exactly where or exactly how, but we do know that they're going to come, and we want to be ready to shine for you. We want to come through on the other side, standing on the sea of glass. We just pray for your help today. In Jesus' name, amen.